I knew I wanted to be in private practice. I just didn't know exactly what that meant. So I emailed a bunch of private practice owners and I was like, I need to do this assignment. And one responded, and she's who I interviewed. And actually ended up working with her for a little bit as a contractor, doing like assessments for the state of Texas.
On this episode of the CompassionWorks Way, we'll hear Jordan speak to Jinnelle Powell. Jinnelle is the owner and founder of Distinctive Counseling and Consulting, PLLC, in Texas, where she oversees a dynamic team of fully licensed counselors, provisionally licensed counselors, and student counselors in training. She's a doctoral candidate at Walden University, a licensed professional counselor and board-approved supervisor in Texas, and an EMDR trainer, consultant, and certified therapist through the EMDR International Association. Jinnelle also works as an educator in the role of an adjunct faculty in counselor education and supervision. In this episode, Jinnelle walks us through her journey of starting her own practice, the importance of self-awareness, the business side of owning a practice, and things that can be outsourced to aid in building your practice. You can learn more about Jinnelle by visiting our website, CompassionWorks.com, or Jinnelle's practice, DistinctiveCounseling.com. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to the CompassionWorks Way, featuring insightful discussions, inspiring stories, and expert interviews on mental health, building your practice, and personal and professional growth. This show is brought to you by CompassionWorks, your hub for therapists, mental health professionals, and seekers of holistic healing. Your host, Jordan Schaefer, founder of CompassionWorks and licensed EMDR therapist. Together, we'll create a world where compassion and understanding transform lives. CompassionWorks, empowering therapists and transforming lives. Now let's get into the episode.
I'm here with Jinnelle Powell, and Jinnelle's an LPC private practice, and you also actually have other therapists with you that work for you. But I guess what we're interested today is people who kind of start out in their career as counselors, licensed mental health professionals, really. If they want to get started in private practice, I think a lot of people do. That's why they do the work. What ideas do you have or recommendations? What would you tell somebody to go do, right?
Yeah, I think that it varies based on kind of personality, right, and skill set. So I think first would be making sure that you're very self-aware in terms of what are your strengths, what are you really good at, and what are areas that maybe you might need to outsource. Really, I think the best way to do that is consulting with other private practice counselors. That was actually one of the very first things I did while I was in my grad program. I consulted with a counselor in private practice, and I picked her brain, got ideas in terms of what I would want to do, what I'm looking towards, even understanding what it looked like on the business side of it. And over time, really understanding for myself, this is what I'm good at. I'm not very detail oriented. So credentialing myself through insurances is probably not going to be at the top of my list of things that I'm going to be good at in private practice. So I knew right away I needed to outsource that specific task.
Oh, I see.
So I think the first thing is just being self-aware, I think is important.
Well, I guess, is it reasonable to think you can come out of grad school and go into private practice, or would you recommend getting a job at an agency first? What are your...
Yeah. Well, now in Texas, you can get out of grad school and go straight as an associate into private practice as long as your supervisor agrees that you're prepared and ready to do so and agrees to supervise you. Do I recommend it? No. I think you've got to build a network of other professionals. And you've also got to build your name in the community. People don't tend to refer to people that they don't know what their work is like. And so it might take some time for you to build up the caseload you're going to need to see the revenue to support yourself in private practice.
And is it true that associates don't take insurance? Is that changed, or is that the way it is?
Yeah, so associates cannot accept insurance, but there are some insurances that allow for incident to billing, meaning that if your supervisor is credentialed and works in your practice and supervises the work that you're doing with patients, you can see clients with that insurance, but only under your supervisor who has to work in the practice. So that doesn't work if you have your own private practice. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work if you're working in a private practice where your supervisor doesn't work.
Okay, so there is some gray area there where people can work. Okay.
Yes, it's called incident to billing, or pass-through billing is what some other insurance companies call it. And sometimes it's in the contract. Your supervisor would know, and it has to be through their billing, through their NPI. So your supervisor will know because it'll be in their contract, and or they will have some sort of documentation from the insurance company that stipulates that.
Okay, so getting back to where we were then, in grad school, you had a colleague or a friend or somebody you knew who you would pick their brain about how to open a private practice? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, and so it wasn't anybody I knew. It was actually an assignment. We had to interview a counselor in the area that we wanted to learn more about. And so you could pick a counselor working in a community health agency. You could pick a school counselor. You could pick someone working in the university setting. I knew from the get-go I wanted to be in private practice. I just didn't know exactly what that meant or even looked like. So I emailed a bunch of private practice owners and I was like, I need to do this assignment. And one responded, and she's who I interviewed. And actually ended up working with her for a little bit as a contractor, not doing counseling, but doing like assessments for the state of Texas. So it landed me some work too.
Okay. But it was really one interview for assignment, or was it several?
Yeah, it was an interview for an assignment.
Okay.
But it also allowed me to get more information in terms of what I needed to start planning for and preparing for.
Okay. And then, so now out of grad school, did you start your own private practice, or what did you do?
No way.
Okay.
I still was like a deer in the headlights.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we had a conversation about that. I forgot.
Yeah. I still took my time. I worked in community mental health.
Okay.
I was doing contract work for a little while, doing assessments, just getting my feet wet, really networking and developing relationships with those in the community. It wasn't until 2017 that I actually decided, okay, I am going to do private practice, but I wasn't ready to do it on my own. Mm-hmm. And so I joined a group, and I did it as an independent contractor. And I remember even the group practice owner, and I still say this to this day when I hire people, he was like, this is sometimes a stepping stone for new professionals. I get that. You might be here 2 to 3 years and then you do your own thing. That's okay with me. And it's the same way I approach it with my clinicians. You know, this might be a stepping stone for you. It might be part of your experience so that you can go out and do this on your own. And if that's the case, that's okay. We're building a relationship no matter what. So, and they're getting experience, right? And so for me, that was that next step in terms of like, okay, can I be in private practice and financially make it? Because I think that's another scary part of it, is knowing whether or not you're going to make enough money, because it's not salary. It's not a guaranteed check. It's based off of your billable hours. And so that was a fear of mine initially. But I've told everybody since 2017, I've never had a month that I wasn't able to pay my bills and live comfortably. And so I don't regret it whatsoever. And then I did that for about 2.5 years and then made the leap to doing it on my own.
So you joined a private practice or a group practice. I mean, really, that's what it was, right?
Yes.
But there was somebody in charge of the group practice who you went to work for that person, or is that how that looks like? You work for that person in that group?
Yes.
Something like that.
Exactly.
They rent you the office, find you clients?
Yeah, they had a contract with Child Protective Services to provide mental health treatment. And so they had a steady flow of referrals So the majority of my clients were either through that contract or we saw them through like Medicaid insurance. And then I would have like a handful through like private insurances.
Okay. Okay. And but you left there to go out on your own. And what did that look like? I mean, did you rent an office or make business cards?
Yeah.
What did you do?
So I got a little bitty office with no windows in a building that was like $300 a month.
Oh, really?
I was like, this is all I can afford. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've always had business cards, but you know what? I can't really say that I remember going out and passing them out. By the time I was at that 2.5 year mark, and it was right around the time that I got EMDR trained, right? And so I was an EMDR trained therapist. And I think the amount of, networks that I had already built in, people who knew of my work and knew who I was as a counselor within the community, and then just having EMDR trained, those two things were enough to, I couldn't keep up with the amount of phone calls. And it came to a point where I started to have a wait list pretty quick. And that's specific to my experience, right? In the area that I'm in Corpus Christi. We're not saturated with therapists the way maybe some of the bigger cities might be. So that was my own experience. But yeah, I rented a little office and just basically said I had a website, and I went on Psychology Today and built myself a profile and got consistent referrals that way.
And let me see. Did you specialize? Well, you specialized. You took EMDR training. You became an EMDR therapist. Yes. Did you have any other kind of specialty you were doing, or like eating disorder?
Because of my experience, no eating disorder work. We need more therapists who can do eating disorder work in the Corpus Christi area. But no, I did. So when I worked in the group practice, we worked with the contract with Child Welfare Services. And it was, most of our client base was either recently had experienced trauma or had a long history of trauma. And so that was my specialty, was helping clients work through traumatic experiences. And EMDR was just that next thing that really helped to accelerate the treatment process.
Had you taken other classes
no other
prior
specialty.
to that? No. Any other, we
had to do trauma-informed training to have the contract with Child Welfare Services.
Okay.
So I had some trauma-informed trainings prior to, but nothing as in-depth as the EMDR training.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask, so really EMDR training was more in-depth or more directly about working with trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about the idea of the networks. You're networking like with Rotary or psychiatrist. What do you, and you're
other professional, other professional counselors, so psychiatrists, other treatment providers under the child welfare contract that agency had. And so we had to have, continuity of care. So there were times where I was staffing cases with a psychiatrist, the CPS case managers. So people who were in direct contact with our clients. A lot of times when CPS case managers, I don't know if you know, there's a huge amount of turnover. Some of them are getting their degrees. Yeah, right. It's a high stress job. Well, a lot of them, they're in process of getting their degrees, right? They're like in the social work field, or they're going to become counselors themselves, or they stay in social services, but maybe they move into a different space. And so those kinds of relationships in terms of networking, school districts, and you work with kids, you're going to work with teachers, you're going to work with their school counselors. And then I would also too, people would find me, not people, but like doctors' offices, because there's, not enough mental health professionals in the area. And so they're looking for people, and they will just find you on Psychology Today. And that was one way that I was getting a lot of referrals. But once I had that client in my office, they'd go back and they'd say, oh yeah, I've been making this improvement. Well, then I became a part of their referral list in that doctor's office, because the doctor's like, oh, okay, my patients are coming back and they're saying that they're seeing positive outcomes. So that was another way that I built my kind of networking. Never walked into a doctor's office, but I've got like 3 or 4 who can. I've got like 3 or 4 who consistently refer to our practice. And there's been some too where I had one patient, I didn't know they were a patient of that doctor, but they went in and said, I've been doing better. I got added to their referral list based off of, word of mouth, basically.
Okay, so you didn't go out because I'd heard about going to doctor's offices and dropping off cards and buying the doctor lunch or something like that. You didn't do that kind of thing.
Nope. Well, no, I'm not that social. Not buying anybody lunch.
But did you go to like networking meetings? Do they still do those, or do they do them? So you're not, when you say networking, you're just saying making friends, or meeting colleagues, or what?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm using the word wrong. Because I never did like go out to meetings or organizations or any. It was more of like, these were people that I had a professional relationship with and were aware of my role as a counselor, and either had some sort of indirect or direct contact with clients that I worked with.
Okay.
So I think it comes down to like the work that I was doing, and that's something that I try to teach my associates.
Yeah, I'll tell what
is the moment their patient sits down or their client sits down on the couch.
Yeah.
That is almost in and of itself going to determine your reputation in the community, right? The quality of the work that you're doing, I think, can speak for itself a lot of times, because people do talk about that. I think now there's less of a stigma associated with mental health treatment. And it's something that people will say, I'm seeing my therapist this week.
Yeah.
Right? We see it all over TikTok, social media. Yeah. And so, and then people will say, oh, I'm looking for a therapist. Who do you see? Right? Now, when you go into a doctor's office, they're screening. They're using those PHQ-9s to screen for depression. And they're asking their clients, are you seeing a mental health specialist? And sometimes that client might say, yeah, I see this therapist, Jinnelle Powell. And at least here in our community, because we're small, that's how doctors will find out and will write. It's been my experience. We'll write down your name on their list of referral sources.
Okay, so you don't have a Rolodex with their name and their wife's name and their pet's name and their birthdays of the kids.
A Rolodex. I remember my mom's Rolodex.
Okay.
I haven't seen one of those in a long time.
Okay. Well, because I'd heard about going to doctor's offices and dropping off cards and introducing yourself. Now, that might be an area of
I think
interest.
as a new...
Okay.
Well, and I think as a brand new professional, that would definitely be a recommendation. If you hadn't started building relationships with other professionals in the community already, where they know of your work, then that would be that next step of determining what is the population that you're working with, and then seeking out, right, doctors. If you're going to work with youth, then you're going to go to pediatricians' offices. Yeah, I might recommend doing something like that. Now, are they going to refer? If, your first few clients, if you hit it off and you're doing well, then yes, because they're going to get that information back from that client and they're going to see how things are going, right? Or you might even establish a relationship. What I did too in the very beginning was when I got a referral from a doctor's office, I would get a release of information and I would send them a quick little, this client came in for their first session and they're going to continue services. So they got to put that in the client file and showed, follow up and continuity of care. So that's another way too to maintain that relationship.
Did you do that more than once or just the first time?
I did that with any time. I did that the first, I don't do it anymore. The very first year I did it with any client that was referred specifically from a doctor's office. Oh, and I set up a fax too, so they could send me referrals, because that's the only way doctor's offices here in this area will send referrals.
Still?
Is through a fax.
Still.
Even though it's it's a fax online. Still come.
Oh, yeah. But they don't. It's a phone number, right?
But it's a fax. It's HIPAA compliant. But when I started making those contacts and I said, well, send me their information. They said, well, the only way we'll send it is fax. And I thought to myself, but who has faxes anymore? But it's easy to Google and figure out how to set up a fax. I use faxage.com. Yeah.
So, but just to wear this one out, so you didn't go to networking meetings. Do they have them in Corpus Christi? All the professionals, all the therapists get together? Because I know in Plano, they are in
the Gulf Coast.
Dallas, it's a big thing, right?
They do.
Networking meetings, yeah.
You know what they do? They have on Wednesdays, there's a group of therapists who has started. I see it. I'm on a social media group called Corpus Christi Psychotherapists.
Yeah.
And there's maybe 100 of us on there.
Oh.
And in that group, they meet in person Wednesday nights, the first Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. And they'll meet at Coffee Waves and a couple of my associates have attended those. It's too late for me. It's 7 p.m. So I've never gone.
Midnight for you.
Pretty much.
You're
but they do.
But that's not something you did or you're even recommending or...
I think it could be good. It's a good way to establish relationships if you're very brand new, or even if you've been around a while and you just haven't reconnected or connected with the community. Maybe you took some time off and you're coming back into it. I think that's a good way to establish those relationships, because we do refer out to each other. If our practice is too busy, we're going to make referrals out. And I only refer to other clinicians where I know of their work. Right. And how do you know of their work? Well, you have to have a relationship with them. How do you establish those relationships? By attending, engagements that kind of meeting Wednesday, first of the month, that type of thing.
Yeah. Some people like that and some don't. But I would think you'd be the one who would like that. But you might would. You're not saying
something's wrong with my social engagement.
I don't know.
No, I don't mind it. I'll do it when I'm at conferences and things of that nature. But no, it's not my. And maybe it's because I'm so busy right now. I'm still writing my dissertation. Got a lot going on. So it might also be that where I'm the entire time I'm there, I'm thinking about maybe a list of other things I've got to get done. Or there's a list of things I've got to get done. So.
Okay. And then starting out, so as an associate, we talked about that. It's harder. Maybe find somebody you can work under or actually go to work for an agency to get experience to where you get fully licensed. But then do you recommend taking insurance, or is that how you started with insurance, or no? Some do, some don't. Yeah. I think it depends, entirely on how quickly you need your practice to grow. If you can wait it out and you're not worried about the income side of it for whatever reason, some people have different financial circumstances, then you might be able, to build enough clientele who will pay that $150, $200 every 2 weeks or every week. My experience in my specific demographic has been that most people cannot do $150 a week, not even every 2 weeks, right? That's quite a bit of money.
So I know for me, there was no other way to do it other than to be able to accept insurance. And in my group practice, I quickly realized that Blue Cross, Blue Shield, those are the majority of people that were calling us up. Well, in this area, for whatever reason, that's like 80% of our clientele have Blue Cross, Blue Shield. And so when I'm, working with my associates and I'm teaching them about being in private practice and, helping them work towards that, it's one of the first ones I tell them, you're probably going to want to get on Blue Cross Blue Shield once you become fully licensed. That's one of the very first ones you're going to want to get on.
Okay.
The next one is going to be Medicaid. Right. So, but I mean, I think it just depends. I know if you're going to need regular income and you're in a demographic where that population is not going to be paying $150, $200 a session, they're going to prefer to use their insurance, then yeah, you should at least get on a couple if it's just you by yourself, and get on the two most popular. You can find that out by who's the largest employer, who are some of the largest employers, what kind of insurance do they carry, or do they provide their employees. So our school district in the Corpus Christi area, they're one of our largest employers, right? And so most of them have Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then we have another big employer in the area, Aetna, is there. So I think it just depends on kind of where you're at and what the population looks like. Mm-hmm. And then Medicaid, this actually a fully licensed clinician who was in group practice gave me this advice about a year in, because I didn't want to do Medicaid because I've heard horror stories about Medicaid, right? And she said, well, it's really nice because it balances out the beginning of the year when everybody needs to meet their deductibles. People start to slow down right around that time because now they're paying the full rate out of pocket, right? So they want to wait till their deductible gets met and then they'll be more consistent. Medicaid balances that time out because they're not having to meet a copay or deductible, and they can still come in. And so it helps to manage that flow of income. And so when she said that, I thought, oh, that's smart, and got on Medicaid.
And as an LPC, you can take Medicaid, not Medicare. Is that how it works?
Not Medicare yet, although there was a bill that was just passed, and I believe within the next year, we should become eligible to get credentialed with Medicare.
Okay, anything else starting out new? But you mentioned, what do you got?
Keep track of your expenses.
Really?
Use QuickBooks or an Excel sheet because come tax time, it's a lot harder to backtrack. Have a separate bank account for those expenses, and how you pay yourself, I think, is really important. After the first year, I was like, I don't want to do this. So I got an accountant and she's handled it for me since. And I use QuickBooks, and it's been a lifesaver, and it's definitely worth the time or worth my time, because the less time I'm doing admin work, and I think this is where some clinicians feel scared, right? Like, well, if I'm paying this, that's money out of my pocket. But if you're paying for a service, that's more time you have to bring in revenue to the practice and more downtime. Because we're not accountants, we're not attorneys, right? We're not credentialing specialists, we're mental health counselors. So I think sticking to what you're good at is important when you decide to make that leap and go into private practice, and to remember that and not be afraid to admit, I'm not an accountant. That's okay. You're going to be better off for it in the end. You'll save time and you'll be able to bring in revenue doing things that you are good at.
I see. Yeah, income tax is a difficult thing.
Yeah. Yes, especially when you're on your own in business, because you think about that, like how much is going to have to go to get paid out to IRS, right? And nobody teaches you that stuff. That's not what they teach us as LPCs. They just don't. And many of us tend to not be good at that. So I invested in an accountant, and I love that I can go to her with questions and she keeps me in line. So makes it worth it.
Okay. And then you did mention you became EMDR trained. That helped with the trauma and also gave you a modality. You want to say any more about that? Or I'm not pushing EMDR.
Yeah, I mean, I'll push EMDR all day long.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, that's fine.
Yeah, it shifted my practice. I mean, and then I started getting referrals that were specifically just because of that.
Oh.
So people who didn't even know me. In fact, once I became certified, there was only one other certified therapist who I think he retired once somebody else finally became certified because he's no longer working. He's an older gentleman, but he was the only EMDR certified therapist in the community. I've never met him, never once interacted with him.
Do you know his name?
But when he gets calls, Dr. Curry.
Okay.
Dr. Curry, Thomas Curry.
Okay.
Yeah. And so when he gets referrals to, because he still gets calls because people know of him, right? He did EMDR. He refers them my way. And we've never met, but he knows I'm the only EMDR certified therapist in Corpus Christi. And so he knows that. So he sends people my way. I think it also, it increased my confidence in working with clients who have experienced complex trauma, right? So I felt much more grounded in my ability to keep my clients stable while revisiting their trauma history. And then I think the other thing it did for me too is like, oh, I don't have to sit here and listen to the entire story, and my clients don't have to relive it. Right? I mean, well, they kind of do a little bit, but not in the same way of I'm just going to have you blurt out your story and then I'm going to see you next week. It was much more intentional whenever I was using or when I started using EMDR.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And you felt that did shift your practice?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other treatment modalities you think could be helpful?
DBT, I think, is another one. I don't use DBT, but I do get a lot of people who call our practice looking for therapists who are DBT trained. Outside of that, I mean, CBT, TFCBT is another pretty popular one. I did CBT when I worked in community mental health agency. It's one of the first modalities that I learned, and it's evidence-based, so insurances liked it. So it was something that I did for a while, but would I go back to it? No, not now that I know EMDR.
Okay. Well, I think that covers then, unless you have something else to go into. You feel like you covered how for people to get started in private practice.
Yeah. I think, too, in the long term, I didn't mention this, but having diverse streams of revenue is important, I think.
Okay.
Because not having your income based specifically on client contact hours, because that can be exhausting when that's all you're doing. I think that's one of the ways that some clinicians will get burned out, is all they're doing is 25, 30 hours a week. Versus, I can do consultation and I can do some trainings or workshops to break up that monotony, or even supervision.
Okay, so
you have other ways of earning.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever do the thing where you go out and give talks and try to build client base?
Not try to build a client base. I have done talks. I've only gotten paid a couple of times. Other times they were for free.
Yeah, okay. So
it's always a nice surprise when you find out you're getting paid. But no, not to get clients. I've gone to like community fairs and had like our table, and we advertise we're a community mental health or we're a mental health company and those types of things. But not to secure clients.
Okay. Okay, so that's, I think we got it covered. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
I think part of it's personality, too. Oh, let's talk about that. I think there are people who get clients who have an abundance of clients, and I don't know, is it personality? How can you be that good up front? Is it because, what is your take on that? Do you know you have a winning personality?
Well, it probably has to do with the ability to connect and build relationships, right?
Oh, okay.
I would think, right? If you have the personality where you establish relationships really well and you can connect with your clients. Because when we look at one of the biggest outcomes of what contributes to good outcomes in therapy, that rapport, that therapeutic alliance is one of them. You got to get your clients to keep wanting to come back. Right. So maybe, that's interesting, Jordan, because when you were the reason why I decided to jump private practice on my own. I knew I always wanted to, but it was one of the weekends we were having lunch and I was telling you I worked in the group practice and how it was going. You were like, you could do this on your own. You've got the personality for it. And you told me that. And it was like one of the little jump kicks that I needed, or jump start I needed to do it. And I did. I think within a month after that, I was like, I'm doing this. Jordan said I can do it.
I gave you
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah, that's good. So, and the part about my supervisor told me once he had lots of clients, and his band for connecting with people was this big. So if somebody was, this big, then he could probably connect with them because he's going to be in that band of connection. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. My band of connection is like this. So I'm going to miss a lot of people. That's now that I guess I care, but it's not an issue anymore. So is that something my guess is you were a high school cheerleader.
Yes, that is a good guess.
There you go, see. So meaning that you've always connected with people in a certain way. It comes natural.
Right.
Or do you think it's something you can learn? It's both. You never thought about it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I've got an associate right now. He's working on learning that. So I guess time will tell if she can.
To widen
how
her
to
ability
build those relationships. Yes.
It's the connection.
Yes.
And I noticed, one day that my clients would always ask me how I'm doing before I would ever ask them how they're doing. And I realized that's kind of backwards, Right? How you doing today? I'm fine. I don't know. How are you doing? But I would think the therapist would be the one who would be going, well, how you doing?
Right. Right.
So I'm just acknowledging my reluctance. Well, and the idea of networking. For you, networking is like, oh, that's what I do. I just go meet people and enjoy it. I don't go to some meeting to network. What is that? Right? You're like just connecting with people. But me, I would go to meetings to network and I hated it, which, obviously then you're projecting this uncomfortable feeling you have, right? Mm. But I think some people do love it too. They like meeting other people and enjoying it.
Yeah, I do when there's purpose to it. And when, I think and this is something that I think is just hard in general, but like that there's, that I don't know if it's a me thing or if it's a them thing, but when people are genuine, when I interpret them as being genuine and authentic, if I am interpreting them as not being genuine or authentic, I don't have as good of a time. So, but some of that is rooted in past, experiences in terms of feeling safe in social settings, right? For me, anyway, that's my experience. But I like it better when people are authentic, even if their authentic self isn't necessarily like the sweetest thing in the world. I'd much rather them be authentic about it than to pretend. And so sometimes networking, I think, in terms of that, in meetings, right? Like organized, like we're here for the purpose of networking. I think it can be very artificial, and that I don't like. And
that's uncomfortable. Yeah, I guess it's
uncomfortable
on why we're here. If we're here so I can meet you and you can meet me, and I can tell you how great I am and you can tell me how great you are, and we can give each other
I don't want to do that.
Then it is uncomfortable, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to build your business, you build mine. But on the other hand, there are reasons for psychiatrists and psychologists to get to meet counselors and vice versa.
Right. Yeah. We got to go to TCA conferences, right? Different things like that, where there's opportunities that I think are a little more organic. Those I tend to enjoy.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we'll wrap up on that as well.
All right. All right.